I think there was like one reviewer who started off with like, I hated Supreme Commander, so I knew I would hate this. And we're just like, why did you review it?
Hello everybody, I'm Mike and I'm here with Jeremy Abels, producer of the game Forged Alliance. Jeremy, thank you for building the best game in the world.
That's awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you all for keeping it alive and keeping it growing.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role on Forged Alliance?
Sure, yeah, I was the producer. Basically, that means I handled all the, what most people consider the boring stuff so that everybody else could make the game. So that would be budgets, scheduling, dealing with the publisher, which was THQ at the time. And they actually were quite possibly the easiest publisher, one of the easiest publishers I've ever worked with on it. Handling morale, team cheerleader, things like that. So basically just keeping everything that's not directly making the game out of people's heads so they could concentrate on what mattered.
And how deep were you in the nuts and bolts of the game itself?
No, yeah, we played the game a lot. I worked on Supreme Commander as well. So basically almost every day we did play tests. Before it was playable, almost every day we played TA.
Cool.
So it was a team-wide thing. Pretty much, I'd say about 70% of the team played the game almost daily. And we were into it. We were not very good at it. We found out once we released, but for about, I'd say 2 days, 3 days, we could hold our own.
That's how long it took after release.
That's how long it took. Yeah. And then once Forged Alliance released, it was nothing. Like, jump back in and just get destroyed.
Yeah,
but we played.
Yeah. And the games that you worked on, I did a little bit of stalking on your LinkedIn. You were one of the producers for Supreme Commander and then the producer for Forged Alliance, is that correct?
Yeah. So for Supreme Commander, it was sorry, we got a frog going on here. It was pretty long development process. So I actually started in as associate and worked my way up with another producer, Gary Wagner. And then he moved into an EP role, executive producer. And then I took over as producer. So for Forged Alliance, I was the producer. And the team, averaged anywhere from like 36 people to about 70-ish there. Just put the push at the end.
Right. That's a big team. And then after that, I think, did you go into Planetary Annihilation as well?
I did work on that a little bit after Ship. So I worked over on, I've done mostly strategy games of some sort throughout my career. So I was on Battle Nations over at Z2 doing free-to-play strategy games, which was kind of like the easiest way to describe it would be basically Advance Wars light. So it was a story-driven game where the combat played out like a very light Advance Wars style game. And then I did come into Planetary Annihilation, though it was well after Ship. So I came in basically to help meet the goals they were attempting to hit that didn't get hit by Ship. And then I also helped drive Titans out the door so that they could get that going and add more to the game on top of what was shipped. So stuff like the unit cannon and things like that weren't there on day one. When I came on, I was actually in Germany and moved back to help out with it because the guys who owned Uber Entertainment were on Forged Alliance. Actually, it was John Maver who was the lead engineer, and Bob Berry who was senior engineer. I don't know if he worked on Forged Alliance, but he worked on Supreme Commander. And they asked me to come back and basically help them drive production. My goal was literally just to try to meet the promises of Kickstarter. I wasn't tied to finance or anything at the time. I just wanted to make the game what they promised it would be, and we got there on it.
Oh, good. Yeah, Planetary
Yeah,
Annihilation, that was one of the first really big Kickstarters, wasn't it? It just came out of
yeah,
nowhere and just made a ton of money. And I still remember seeing that for the first time. It was really,
yeah.
really
It's
cool.
a very different game. It plays very different due to the spherical planets. But yeah, I wasn't there during the development of it at all, though. I came in after release and worked on just trying to meet those goals, and then worked on Titans as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the same team jumps from like game to game, because the TA game devs worked on Supreme Commander, and then part of that moved to Forge Alliance to Planetary
Yeah.
Annihilation, and now I think even on Kerbal as well. You've got some of the same
There's
people.
a few of us. Yeah, there's a few of us on there that worked on done Force Alliance, including our Howard Mostrom. He did the audio for Force Alliance and part of the audio for Supreme Commander, and he's working on Kerbal now as well.
Yeah,
And he also worked on Planetary Annihilation.
so it's this nice team that just is like moving through the decades, kind of like, backwards and
It's
forwards, just creating great stuff
yeah,
along the way.
yeah. There's over 100 studios in Seattle, but it still feels like a very small group. So once you make friends, you end up working with them off and on over the years. I've worked with that. Howard's a good example. I've worked with him for like 15 years,
Yeah,
off and on.
yeah. So some of the other stuff I got from your LinkedIn, it was saying that you work on the pitch process. Did you do that for Supcom?
I did for a little bit of Supreme Commander stuff. I came in after the initial, so I got dogs playing in the background. I did that for the original game to an extent, and then for Force Alliance, I was there from day one. It was actually Brad, who you've already talked to, and myself, and we sat down and said like, let's make basically make Supcom's version of Brood Wars, where it's like in the future, and I guess we did a pretty good job because y'all are still playing it. In the future, when you say Supreme Commander, you mean Forced Alliance was our goal. Same as
Oh,
like
yeah.
when you look back on StarCraft 1, like you don't play it without Brood Wars. It doesn't exist. So that was our goal from day one.
You did
And
such a good job with that. We don't talk about Supreme Commander 2 either.
yeah, 2 is a very different beast. I came in to help ship it. I didn't actually work on it either. I just came in at the very, very end. But it hit its goals, and it was a very, very different game with a much different budget. So I think they did a good job with it, with what they had to work on it, but it did end up being a very different game.
Yeah, they were targeting consoles as well with that one. I think
yeah,
probably
and
influenced it a
and
lot.
the budget was like a third of Supcom's. I would say that if it had a different name, people still love Supcom too, but if it would have been called something other than Supcom, I think it would have done. People
Better.
still today think it was a good game. Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, I played it quite a bit during development. I enjoyed it, but it does play very differently than Supreme Commander.
Yeah, I played it too. I thought it was a great game. But then after that, I started playing Forged Alliance a lot, just because there was a community for it. And
Right.
then after a lot of that, 5 years later, start to appreciate just like how good a game Forged Alliance really is, which is why, we're still playing and still working on it today.
Yeah, Force Alliance is a go. It's a huge game too. It's one of those where you can just keep playing. Like I said, we played it a ton, making it like thousands of hours, and then we released it, and we're like, oh, that's how you play it. When we started watching other people play, from our side, we were not competitive. We would make the big stuff. It's the same way as I played TA. It was like I would race for Krogoths or the can or something, do can drops, and it's like it wasn't the most ideal play style by any means. It was you could flash rush me and beat me every time, but it was what was fun, and that's kind of how we played. That's kind of how we played Supcom as well. And then we released it, and it was just like light assault bots and things like that, where people were winning games with.
And
luckily
you die in the first 10 seconds of the game or something, but it takes 15 minutes to actually happen.
Yeah, luckily our balance folks, got that, and they balanced it with that in mind. But it's not how a lot of us played the game. We were playing to make the big units and the experimentals and just the cool stuff.
But what's the pitch process like? Like, where this is before it's funded, that you have to acquire the funding? Is that the?
So yeah, for for Forged Alliance, it was a little easier because it was an expansion pack. So basically, we had a publisher in place. The original game did well. We pitched the original game as this giant, over-the-top macro RTS. Luckily, THQ was really into strategy games at the time, so they had their micro RTS with Company of Heroes, and they were very happy with that. And I was like, there was actually a meeting with like Chris and all the folks from THQ where it was straight up pitched as, this is the over the top. It's not going to sell as much as Company Heroes. We know that, and we're good with that. This is for the TA players who want to make, at the time it was numbers like 10,000 units, and then we released it. Computers couldn't handle that, but now they can. And so everybody was on the same page with what we were making. It was going to be the over-the-top RTS. And so with Forged Alliance, it was, that plus. We pitched it as, Supcom's Brood Wars at the time was kind of how we were calling it. We went through with the new faction that we added to it. It was a real big focus on single-player campaign, which for a standalone RTS, it was standalone, which also was kind of pushing hard on trying to allow THQ to catch new players who may not have bought the original game back in the day, pre-digital marketplace, where it was a little harder. And then, so the pitch process was actually fairly easy for this one because we already had a market, we already had a player base, and they were excited about it.
Yeah, but still, like, how does it work? Do you have like concept art that you take with them? Do you have like the whole Seraphim, faction designed to some level, or do you just walk in and say, yeah, we're going to throw in a new faction, and that's all you've got?
So Brad was working heavily on it, along with Drew Stoltman was the other one he was our engineer who worked heavily on it. And basically we concepted out, like we verbally concepted. It wasn't like Supcom didn't push hard on art concepts early on because we could just prototype units at that point. So stuff like we would be able to have, here's a giant crab robot that can lay eggs. And those eggs can hatch into new units, and Drew could just put those together. It didn't work well and it didn't look good, but you could get the gist of how the game played. I think we white boxed an entire mission you could play, which was I forget which one it was, but basically it was just Survive, which was based on, again, pulling back to Brood Wars, it was based on the like Terran 2 mission where you just have to survive against Zerg or trying to overrun your base for so long. And then, we pushed it as that, and that kind of helped get that point across and sell it to the folks at THQ who knew those old games. Like our producer at THQ at the time was ex-Petroglyph as well, so he had a big history in Command and Conquer and everything. Again, it was a really easy sell because we were working with people who understood the history of RTS. So they understood what we were trying to do.
Yeah, you're just in front of the right people with the right pitch, I guess.
Yeah, it was a real lucky pairing in terms of publisher at the time.
Is that something that could happen again?
It could. Like the current publisher I'm working with is equally as easy because they get the IP. And that's just kind of where it comes in. The other thing that tends to help from the developer side, is if your publisher is ex-developers, that always makes things easier because you can just go in and say, here's what we're doing and why. And they're like, oh yeah, we get that. We understand that. We've done that. But if your publisher has just been a publisher their whole life, then sometimes it's harder because you have to explain why and the background and how the development works. And it doesn't always make sense. And some people have trouble because, mini games, especially if it's not an expansion pack or an edition, it's not fun until the last little bit. And so you're like, here's core gameplay. And they're like, well, this sucks. You're like, yeah, of course it sucks. Like, here's what we're gonna do to make it fun. We're just proving out core gameplay. With publishers who've been developers, they're just like, okay, cool. Yeah, we get it. Great. Let's keep going. And again, for Forged Alliance, we were lucky enough to have that in place.
Yeah, I've seen that sort of issue where you show someone a quick mock-up of an idea just to try and convey the concept, and they're like, looks terrible. And they just shoot the whole project down based on that. So it's almost better not to give them a mock-up because they can imagine something better than what you can produce in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, it's the whether you show gameplay that gets the point across but isn't fun, or you just show very pretty art. It kind of depends on who you're pitching to.
Right.
For Forged Alliance, we could show gameplay that was unfinished and very unfinished feeling, and they would still be able to say like, okay, yeah, cool, we see what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I guess it helps
again,
that you have an entire game engine already there in place. Before, so that must make it easier. What about the pre-production phase? I don't even know what pre-production means.
So yeah, pre-production, it depends on which studio you're at. For Supreme Commander, it was just literally getting stuff playable. For Forged Alliance, it was way easier because, like you said, we had the engine in place. Pre-production, we put every Seraphim unit was made in the game. Every new unit was made in the game. Our content engineers is what we called them at Gas Powered, which were basically technical designers who could code. Some had been engineers previously and were moving into design, or designers trying to just learn more coding. Just concepted out the units, drew, and an artist would white box them, which is just put them together in crappy box form, but they would work. So, a tank could literally be a cube with another cube on top that would point at things. And we did that with every single unit. And then our level designers put together all the levels in a similar format, where just very basic dark blue water, sand colored land. And we put together the entire campaign. And you could play the entire Seraphim campaign. They balanced it out to where it was actually somewhat fun and probably overly challenging. And then that's kind of what we showed across to get the point across and show how long it would take and all the new units that were being added and whatnot. And then getting the AI to actually work with those. And then the artists just replaced those units as we went with better looking units. So
I want to play the white box version. That sounds really cool.
It was, I remember it still, and it played really well. I mean, it played just like the original game, or just like the final game. The cool part was just like you would load up the game the next morning and you'd be playing, and all of a sudden you would see a really cool looking unit coming at you, and you'd be like, oh, what is that? You'd go hover over it and try to figure out what the artists had replaced. But yeah, that was one of the times it worked the best, where literally we had all the people in place and they could just put the entire game together in white box format and you could play it and it was fun.
Yeah. Is that just a way of enabling all the different teams to actually do their job, so that because the game's sort of working end to end already, so that now the artists can do their bit and your programmers can do their bit and they can all just go off and do their stuff? It's kind of like stubbing a game.
Yeah, basically that's exactly what it is. The cool part was that it allowed us, like our version of the game, and almost every game I've ever worked on, like the goal is to get it playable as fast as possible. And if you can get it playable, then you can focus on making it fun. So like I said, if you come in at the last minute and it's like, okay, it's finally playable, then you have like 2 months of polish and balance. For FA is a good example of where we had it playable in the first couple of months, and it was a 12-month dev cycle.
Yeah.
So we had like 8 months, 9 months to actually balance the game out, make it fun. And I think that actually proved out at the end result in the sense of it was more balanced than the original game when it came out. We had one other goal, which was it should have a better review score than the original game. I don't know if depending on which one we got, we accomplished that in some. I think PC Gamer, it was a little bit lower, but yeah, that was our other like high watermark for the expansion.
Right. Cool. Yeah, well, if you go and have a look on the Steam reviews at the moment, it's just overwhelmingly positive. So I don't know how many.
So cool.
Yeah, no, it's a loved game. I don't know about Supreme Commander, the original. Supcom. I say Supcom. I need to start saying Supcom. It makes sense.
I think even on the team itself, people called it different things. And then it also depends on where you're from. We had like different things were pronounced differently. We had some like, Chris was from Canada. We had a couple of Canadians who actually pronounced certain things differently. So even on the team itself, it would depend on who was saying it as to how it was pronounced. I always called it Supcom. I think Brad calls it Supcom as well, if I remember correctly. But we had others who did say Supcom.
Fair enough. With the pre-production phase, how do you know like when you're finished? Like, do you just keep on white boxing until it's fun? Is that the point where you say, okay, it's time to start making, you know, we're going to run with this? Or how do you know when to stop?
So ideally, that would be the way you would do it. The reality of it is when the milestone schedule says it's done. You know, we had our budget, which was a very good budget for an expansion pack. Again, THQ was a really good partner for that, and we got lucky for it. But we basically just continued pushing on it until they told us to quit, and then we started making it. Production phase.
What the schedules all worked out basically when when the pitch is accepted, I guess, and then part of that pitch is like milestones and what will get delivered when. So you have to, but you know that's really limiting because you could actually realize midway through development that there's this other idea that is so much better than what you're actually working on. But do you have that freedom to pivot like that?
Nowadays, much more so than back then. Back then, it was all waterfall, which basically just meant like you had a giant list. Like literally, we used an Excel list for Forged Alliance. That was just like a couple of tens of thousand lines, and then I would sit down with the leads, and we would just go through this list as we worked through it. But yeah, early on, basically, what I would do was sit down with Brad, our engineering lead, which was Maber at the time, Drew, our content engineering side, and a few others, and we would just work out like best guess, like, hey, a unit takes, we know from past experience a unit takes, I can't remember the numbers at this point, but let's say 3 weeks start to finish. So we're adding 100 units. This takes this many weeks. We've got this many people. Do the math and make a best guess, add 20 to 30% to that, and say, cool, we're done with pre-production at this point.
Yeah, that works well for things you can think of, but what about things you can't think of? Like, you know, there's this massive desync issue over here. You never had an estimate.
For that sort of thing, that's the 30%. You add that slush fund in there, kind of. And then for expansion packs like this one, where everything was working already, you end up with more than 30% even, because things always get done a little faster than previous. But you've set the expectation of timing on the original game, so you get a little bit more time.
Yeah, and then you just do whatever you can do within that time constraint and make it as good as you can. And were you saying that you sort of like try and push it a little bit, like, you know, you try and get a little bit more time when you can, or do you just like rigidly stick to the original times?
So for this one, we did stick to the original. I believe we had it scheduled out to ship in February, March, which at that point in time in game development was the right time to release a strategy game that was somewhat independent, because you didn't have to compete with all the major players. Again, this was kind of the very early days of Steam, so there weren't any Steam sales or anything like that. There was no Epic Store. So a lot of those weren't in place. It was a different marketplace. But we stuck to that 12-month schedule pretty rigidly. What was within that 12-month schedule could be shifted a little bit, but from our side, we knew that if we wanted to hit the pre-production as fast as possible, we just need to get the game playable. For this game, we, stars aligned, and we didn't have any issues really at all. For Forged Alliance, it all just worked. Quite possibly the easiest in terms of getting everything to work of any game I've worked on in my career. So yes, normally you do have to shift things around. Sometimes you have to crunch. Sometimes you just have to drop stuff and realign priorities. For this one, we didn't have to. It just all came together.
Yeah, so that's a question coming up. There was no big crunch at the end of the project just before the release date?
No, this one we did pretty good. I don't think, we crunched maybe a little bit, but it was weeks, not months. And it was volunteer crunch, if I remember correctly. I didn't ask anyone to. They chose it just to make the game better. Um, it was the I don't want to say the easiest because it was due to everyone's hard work, but basically everything aligned better than, like I said, any game I've worked on in my career.
That's great. And with the production phase, so like, what is your role in that? Are you like touching base with all the different teams? Like, how do you keep track? How do you know if they're on schedule? What do you do when they're not?
So from that side, on the way I was running that team was basically if it worked between departments, if design needed to work with art, if design needed to work with engineering, production was involved. And the reason for that was just to allow them again to concentrate on what they needed to concentrate on as much as possible. And then production, which was either me or one of the assistant producers, would run things down for them. So we'll use Brad as an example. Brad would talk to engineering and say, I need this functionality to make a crab be able to lay eggs and still be able to move at the same time, which I don't know if we ever made work. I can't remember. For a long time we couldn't. And that would be as far as he needed to take it. He'd get the spec over, he'd say exactly what he needed, he'd tell the engineers, and then production would chase it down and Brad could go concentrate on something else. And then we did weekly syncs, if I remember correctly, for each department. So the leads would have to sit in, basically the department would have to sit in once a week and go over what was being done. We didn't do stand-ups back then. There was no agile back then. Again, it was all waterfall. And then the leads and I did syncs pretty much daily to make sure everything was on track. And then back then production had to be way more involved because you didn't have as many sync ups. So the way less meetings. So I would just basically be walking around the whole time talking to people.
Sounds like you're trying
everything
to
was going okay.
Sounds like you're trying to find the blockers between teams and making sure that they get solved before they're an issue.
The way I worded it was like, I didn't really make the game. My goal was to just remove all the crap so that people could make the game.
Yeah.
Like that's the gist of production, at least, especially back then.
Yeah. And with the whole like waterfall and all this, the estimates that you had for the project, is that something that you had before the pitch was accepted, or is that something that you made afterwards?
For an expansion pack, it's way easier, but even for the original game, it was something we had. Like the entire milestone plan was laid out before we moved forward. Usually you can adjust it through pre-production, but once you hit production, everything was final. And it was stuff like, every game's different, but I remember Supreme Commander and Force Alliance, we had like stuff to the detail level of like 30 new units by this milestone. And then we had a giant Excel sheet that had every unit name, like their development name. And as they got added, we would have it in a giant map that had every unit on it that we would deliver each milestone, as well as a clickable for screenshots. And
I would like to see that spreadsheet. I don't know if that sort of thing's possible, but it'd just be.
No, I don't. I have a lot of development stuff still around somewhere in a box, like posters and T-shirts and things like that. But any code stuff stayed at gas powered. I don't have any of that.
Fair enough. It sounds like it must cost a ton of money to make a pitch in the first place. It's not just like, talking about the idea and, some concept art. You're actually making a full roadmap for a major development project.
Right. So I would say that depends on the game. This one we were lucky enough, again, it was already a pre-existing game, and we were able to make the pitch while finishing the original game. So near the end of development of Supreme Commander, design kind of rolls back a little bit because most of it's done and it comes down to bug fix and polish. So at that point, Brad was able to concentrate on Force Alliance, and that was part of working with THQ. Like they knew it and were supporting it. So they basically paid for the pitch. If you don't have that, then it can be expensive. Usually a pitch process nowadays, if I were, like indie studio wise, anywhere from 3-ish people would be what I'd put on it. Usually you'd have a designer, an artist / concept artist to get it looking good, and an engineer to at least give feedback on it. Usually I would pull an engineer from a team that's doing something else just to kind of give a rough overview of making sure that what we're pitching is plausible, and then the person who's kind of overseeing it. So it's not too expensive, but it's definitely not free.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see the all that process for Planetary Annihilation, because they had some big ideas there that hadn't really been done before. And
Yeah.
I'm curious to know how they formed their pitch, because did they have the money at that point to scope it out properly? Because
Yeah.
they didn't have the Kickstarter yet.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. I know they had just finished Monday Night Combat, Super Monday Night Combat. So, but I wasn't there for the Kickstarter, so I can't answer that one. For Titans, I was there for that one, and the gist of Titans was trying to bring a little bit of that. Like they had touched on TA and Supcom for PA, and so try to bring a little bit of that Forged Alliance feel with like bigger units, more experimentals that they call Titans, and kind of get some of that over the topness that some people were saying that PA proper was missing. And then also same goal that I always push for DLCs or expansion packs, which would be that it just feels like it's part of the game. Like, why would you play without it? Should be what people think. And if you can hit that, usually it's considered a success in my opinion.
Yeah, it needs to be an upgrade, maybe, not just like some more, not 10 more units, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, unit, not a unit pack. Like you get like quite, yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so you've just finished actually making the game, and this is back in the days before actual digital downloads and stuff. So it seems like it's a really important thing to not have bugs in it. You must have like all different sorts of computer hardware that you support, people on maybe different operating systems and graphics cards and all sorts of different things. How confident were you that it was actually ready when you shipped it?
We were confident on it. We did have, I believe, a day one patch that we pushed out that fixed a bug that some people were running into. I can't remember what that bug was, but it was enough people that we did a day one patch. The big, like when Supcom released, actually the big concern was actually GPGNet more so than the game, because it was the one that was more untested. And then for Forged Alliance, we were feeling pretty confident that we had a great test team, and that was the THQ side as well as some in-house folks. So we were actually feeling, even though the game was huge, we were feeling pretty good on it.
And you did have the ability to release patches as well. I didn't realize that. So they were
we could
downloaded automatically, were they?
No, at the time they weren't. Yeah, I mean, you could choose to download them or not. And I believe we released, like, it would be a news update through GPGNet if I could remember correctly, or you could go to the website. And then we had a forum as well. That we would post it on. And we did a couple of patches for Forged Alliance. We actually had another patch that was supposed to fix a bunch of stuff that y'all probably already fixed. That was the one thing where basically they had moved on and quit wanting to support it from a publisher side because they were having troubles, and then THQ folded, unfortunately. So we actually had another Forged Alliance patch that never got released that had balance changes and a few other things. We even had a unit. I don't remember exactly, but it never saw the light of day. There was forum posts about it though, so I know that information was shared at one point. I just can't remember.
What other functions could we have seen?
To be honest, like, we shoved everything into Forged Alliance that we could make work. So there wasn't a whole lot left out. It was pretty cool how much we were able to get in. There was a couple of campaign missions that got cut, I know, because they just didn't play out right. Story-wise and everything, that was Brad driving that, and I think that he got everything in there mostly that he wanted. There was probably a couple of units that didn't end up being fun or balance out correctly. I know there was some concept out or some design concept out units that never made it in the game due to technical limitations. And some units made it in the game different than the original ideas Brad had. I keep bringing up the egg-laying one because that was one that the engine literally, like, he designed it and the engineers were like, there's no way we can make that work. And then Drew figured out a way to make it work, kind of.
Any detail on those units?
I don't remember, I'll be honest.
Yeah, that's a long time ago now.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, and there was hundreds of units. Like I said, though, we finished this. We were pretty happy with the fact that like 99.9% of what we came up with made it into the game.
Yeah.
Anything that was cut like super early. Like either engineering looked at the design and was just like, nope. And I would say even most of those, Brad just reworked to where they would work in game.
Yeah, but how does that fit with your commitments in that you made at the start of the pitch process with your milestones? You had the freedom and the option to actually remove troublesome like functions that you've sort of like you've agreed to have that unit in the game, right? But you
so we played it smart and got sanity checks from everyone before we pitched them. So nothing was ever shown to the publisher that we didn't think we could make.
But there were some other ideas that you had that you weren't sure that you could make, but they weren't.
Yeah.
They weren't a
Pleasant
commitment
surprises
for those things.
if we pulled them off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Under promise, stretch goals. Yeah.
Stretch goals. And then post-launch support. So that's, I guess, just staying in touch with all the bugs and.
Yeah. So that was, that was again back in the day before there was really any. When we were releasing games back then, it was pretty much the way studios looked at it was you would finish your game, you put a bow on it, shove it out the door, and then go do something else. So post-launch support was kind of sorta. Most companies did very, very little of it. GPGnet allowed us to stay in communication with folks. So post-launch, we actually opened it up for the team to be able to jump in and chat with folks. For the most part, I left it open on my desktop all day, and we would just chat with people throughout the day while working on other stuff. Talking to people on GPGnet, which is, I think, Forge Alliance Forever chat system feels like. I have Forge Alliance Forever open behind me, and it was literally the same feel. So I've got chat going on behind us while I'm talking to you. I would have the same thing, except instead of Zoom, I would have a Word doc or something open. And if someone tried to talk to me, I would bounce over and chat with them for a little bit and then go back to work. Probably about 50% of the team was doing that. So there was a lot of devs online just chatting with folks, but everybody was making very careful not to promise anything or whatnot. But it was allowing us to see kind of what bugs were popping up and things faster than having to rely on forums or anything like that.
And what was their reception like on launch? Like, was there a certain point where you made it and the triumph?
It was there was definitely a moment of that. People were very proud of that one. Myself included. I think the team did amazing on this game. This one really, I said it earlier, this one just came together. When we released it, most everyone loved it. I think there was one reviewer who started off with I hated Supreme Commander, so I knew I would hate this. And we're just why did you review it? Our goal was to make the original game better, and most everyone agreed that it did. So we were pretty excited.
Was it an announcement at work? Was it a party? Was it
we had a party, yeah. Gas Powered always did parties on release, and they had a big flex space. We all got together, and people got to give speeches and whatnot. And Chris gave a speech, and it was fun. It's definitely, there was a sense of accomplishment with this one that you don't always get. People were proud of what they did.
And still today, there's so many people still playing that game and still love it.
Oh, awesome.
Die-hard fans. I think a lot of people agree with me when I say there isn't really anything to compare.
I'm curious to see if and when it hits. This subgenre of RTS, I think, is one that I like it. It's my favorite version of RTS, and I just don't think it gets enough games. But it is interesting, you bring up the community side of things. We brought in a community member for Forge Alliance as well, and that was one of the things that was in that patch. I just remembered. So there was a player called Prepare. At the time of release, it was him and I think Blue Screen were bouncing back and forth between number one on the leaderboards. At the time, Prepare had kept it long enough, the number one spot, that we actually brought him in-house to work with our balance team to help balance Forged Alliance.
So only the best people in the world can play it.
Well, and see, that was the thing though. He actually came in, and we were going to have a balance pass that was his that he worked on, and we flew him in from Germany, and he was awesome. We had him in house. He stayed in Seattle for a while. He worked in the office. And then we had this balance pass, and that's the thing that never got released. But I've actually stayed in contact with him, and he's kept into the games industry. He worked on, I think, as an intern on one of the Command and Conquer 3s, and this is kind of his kickstart into the industry. So he's a design director over in Germany. I'm still friends with him today.
Yeah, so it wasn't just a game for him. It's funny that you say that the best player was German, though, because all of our best players are German as well. What's up with that?
It's still pretty popular there as well, which is pretty cool. If you're making RTSs, it is one of your biggest territories, and you just know that. And there's a lot of good strategy games coming from Germany as well.
Yeah, a lot of good players come from Germany, but also a lot of the developers and contributors. Most of them are German too, I think.
That's true.
We have a joke that, when you go to Germany, your rating automatically goes up by 500 points. But when you come to Australia, where I'm from, your ping goes by 500 points. So.
I'm still friends with him. We still keep up with stuff. TLO was another one that him and his brother played a lot of Forged Alliance and Supcom early on, before he moved over to StarCraft. And same sort of thing. Like we watched. He was friends with him through Supreme Commander. We still watch him off and on through StarCraft stuff. The time zone makes it a little, as you probably understand. Well, the time zone makes it difficult to hang out very often, but when we do hang out, we try to keep up with what's going on in different RTS communities and whatnot.
Yeah, that's cool. You're still in touch with the thread. Throughout the project, were there any really big standout decisions that you made that you think that made a big impact on the project?
So I'm not a designer. Put that out there right now, and I never want to be a designer. I'm very happy doing more production side of things. It's what I enjoy. Early on Supreme Commander, probably the only thing I got in the game. There's a couple things. One was I don't know if it's a good or a bad, but the adjacency bonus was something that I was part of, and kind of I came up with the original idea of it. Again, I don't know if that's good or bad, because I don't know that how much it actually adds to gameplay and how much it was actually fiddly and adding more micro to the game than it needed. But
yeah, Brad was talking about this as well. He was saying that it initially came about because the bases didn't look like bases. There was just things sprawled everywhere. And I've been thinking about it since he said that, but that's like a really clever solution, just to tie a base together.
Yeah, so we were trying to come up with ways to do it. I came up with the idea that putting things together could come up with stuff, and then he was the one who took that and figured out how to make it into actually making bases. And then someone came up with the idea, I don't know if it's Brad or Chris, with the tarmacs underneath that tie together and actually make it feel like there's concrete and stuff around as well.
Yeah.
But it was pretty cool. I don't know if the adjacency adds more micro than is needed. And then I would say the only other thing that shipped in the game that I worked on that wasn't production related was I kind of just handled whatever was needed at the time. So we didn't have an effects artist, and I was adding effects to the game just to get them to where it looked a little better. And some of those shipped, and they should not have. So I believe the original UEF jet, basically the fighter streams behind them, the smoke screens behind them, shipped that I did, and they look okay in the original game, but they got patched out fairly quickly because they were giant, easily 20 times bigger than they should have been. We got a real effects artist; they replaced them immediately.
Right, but you made it in.
Yeah, there you go. There's my my art.
Was that the day one bug fix?
No. This was on Supreme Commander 1, so yeah, it was early on that it got pulled.
When Forged Alliance wound down, that must have been a disappointing day. So you said it before, it was actually because THQ...
They started having troubles. Games at the time, like I said, they mostly released and then they were done. So from a publisher point of view, it was kind of done. And the only thing that kept it alive from the developer side was that we were excited about it, and we had GPGnet to stay in communication with people.
But it was
So
going to wind down anyway.
Yeah, it had a much longer lifespan tail than most games at its time because of GPGnet, which was, that was Chris's idea, and it was a great one. Everybody, it was a little bummed out, and it was one of the games that just kind of worked. Everybody got along. There was some drama, but it was very minimal.
Did you guys have the announcement of, we're stopping this project?
No, it was done the day it was done. So when we shipped, the game was over officially. We weren't getting paid anymore. So no one was. If there's no money, there's nobody working on it for an indie developer.
Whoa.
So the day we shipped, the game was officially done, and then bug fixes and things like that just got attached to people's other work. So like, if someone was working on Forged Alliance, they would have moved over to whatever other game was going on at the time, Demigod or
right.
I'm trying to remember what else we were working on back then, Space Siege maybe. And then I would poke them randomly and say like, hey, we got a bug. Can you fix it? And they'd, oh yeah, sure. It'd take me an hour. I'd work with their producer on their other game, and they would just fix it in their spare time.
Looking forward to the future. I know like we talk all the time about what would be cool in an RTS. There's new hardware now, you got new graphics cards, capabilities, processors are completely different. Have you guys talked about what you would do in a new RTS?
Everybody's chatted about it a little bit. Like Chris is making something cool still, and I've seen touches of it here and there when I see him around town. Maver had his idea of what TA2 should have been, which was what PA ended up being. Brad's got a ton of ideas. These games are tough. They don't sell as well as a StarCraft, micro RTS. It is a tough genre to find funding for, and it's always going to be an indie studio who makes this kind of game because they sell 1 million copies. 1 million copies for a 50-person studio is amazing. EA isn't going to get excited about it because they're looking for 5-10 million copies or more. So it's a tough one to find. It's also an expensive game to make. The engine is difficult because you have to custom make it every time computers change. And the other hard part is that if you make it correctly, unfortunately on release, it runs like crap for like 80% of the world because that's what allows you to still be playing it, however many years later. I don't remember when we even released it, 2007. It's still playable and even better today. Same with TA, like you can throw, I don't even know how many, probably tens of thousands of units at this point, and it's just engine limitations that stop it now instead of computers. That's the key, is that to really make the games the way, in the vein of TA and Supcom, you have to do it with the future in mind, which THQ got, to their credit. They understood it. They made that call early on. It's like, this is going to be the crazy, big, giant RTS that most people can't even play on release. And they were good with that because, again, they had Company of Heroes. That was their tactical, giant mainstream RTS that everyone was playing, and it's an amazing game. And it was an interesting find and a rare find. So I think you'll probably see more of these. They all tend to be tied to TA's team in some form or fashion. Chris, is the brainchild behind the majority of them. And I know he's still working on stuff, so we'll see.
It would be a happy day to see another major RTS come out.
Yeah, I agree. Again, this is my favorite style of RTS. So, like I've done the math. I know how much you can, like I have a gist of how much you can spend to make these games and still make a good profit. And it's a tough sell to a major publisher. The other hard part is that they're hard to make. And so there's not a ton of developers who have done it. You kind of end up with, like you said, the same group of folks over and over again. The engine's difficult.
Wasn't there another expansion pack? There was an experimentals one.
We had stuff planned, I'm sure, but it never, like there was never anything that was anything close to officially being funded.
And you needed THQ probably to take you up.
Yeah, and we owned the IP at the time. I think Square Enix may own it now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Pretty sure.
And then like the only other thing that was done that never got released, there was a novel that was written. I don't know what happened to it. It never got released though. It had a great cover. One of our artists did the cover for it, and I think it was one of Chris's friends wrote it, and it was, but we never could get it to a level where anybody was happy releasing it.
Oh, there's all this nostalgic stuff. I want the novel, I want the Excel spreadsheet, and I want the white box campaign.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. One of our engineers knitted an ACU, like a commander, that was part of the Christmas party. That actually is still around. I ended up giving it to one of the animators at the current studio.
Cool.
There's I think our Maber has the original UEF poster, because I don't know if you saw those posters. They had posters for each faction way back when we gave out at E3 for Supreme Commander's announcement.
No, I don't remember that one.
The UEF original poster says Terran, because that was their original name before it was like, oh wait, that's confusing. So yeah, he still has that, I guess. But there's only ever one printed. Things like that are just like little weird one-offs. There's an ACU ice sculpture at one point. I remember that. Yeah, it was like some THQ event. But yeah, there was lots of funny things like that. There was the one of the dramas was the box cover, because it was like zoomed in on the UEF ACU's chest. It looked like a weird radiator. You couldn't even tell it was a robot. And it was like a big fight to get them to like zoom out so you could see more of it. The Forged Alliance cover was much easier sell. They were just like, do whatever y'all want. And it was me working on a screenshot for like 4 days that became a poster, and then also the box cover with lots of support from the art team with fisheye lenses and stuff. Never made it into the official game, but yeah.
Running out of questions. Let's do a quiz. What's your favorite faction?
Cybran.
Favorite air unit?
The Aeon experimental saucer. It was never made with the intention of it just being a suicide bomber, but the fact that you could blow it up and take out entire bases was hilarious once we figured out you could do it. It was designed and used for a long time just as a really powerful laser. But then the day that someone figured out that, oh wow, when it dies, it takes out everything, and it changed how the unit was made, it was a really funny day and freaked design out, because we had to make lots of balance changes to make up for that. Because when it first got discovered, you could just take out a commander in one hit with it.
So you're losing the game. You know you've lost it. What do you do?
Depends on how mean you want to be. You either go as deep underwater as you can get, and you get like full on like hide a wisp in the woods, Warcraft style. The other option, especially if it's a team game, is commander drops.
Yeah.
Drop your commander to someone's base and take out as much as possible. That's straight from TA. We had one of our engineers he was really, really bad at the game. So if he was ever on your team, the very first thing he would do was race for transports and take his commander in and kill one of your teammates immediately.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the changes they made over at FA Forever, is that the T1 transports can't pick up commanders.
That's
you have
smart.
to get a Tech 2 one, so that gets rid of a lot of stuff. Because you could just have like one player just drops in and hits Control K, kills himself.
And we had an engineer who would do that, and that's probably why it shipped, was that he probably fought to keep it in place.
Right. Yeah. What is the dirtiest move in Supreme Commander?
So the dirtiest move in TA, I'm going to stand by forever, is flash rushes, because I was a core player and I hated flash rushes. The UEF T1 bot was the flash tank of our game for a long time, but I do think it got actually balanced out before we released. That was my least favorite thing, was you would start the game and 100 UEF T1 bots would show up and just
Mech
destroy
Marines, you. I think you're talking about the labs.
Yeah, that's it. That was their names, yeah. But I think that got balanced out a little better. Reclaiming your teammate's base is definitely not great. Tossing your commander underwater and then going AFK is pretty crappy as well, because then they're just having to sit there. Because no one, at least during development, no one ever built sonar, and so you'd have to sit there forever and get your T3 radars up and spy planes out and search just like hiding a wisp. Yeah.
Fair enough. Last question. What are you working on now?
Currently working on Kerbal Space Program 2. Although I am much more on the studio, running the studio side now than I am on actual core game development. So I'm working with the team that is working on Kerbal Space Program 2.
Cool. That's great. Look, thanks heaps for your time. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or any interesting stories that you have?
For a long time there, we used Black Fog of War as opposed to the Gray Fog of War. I don't know if Brad talked about that at all.
He did, actually. It's funny that you both bring it up.
Chris was adamant that it had to be like TA's Fog of War, and Brad was the one pushing hard to get it away from that, and that was the right choice. Because the Black Fog of War really just benefits the person who already memorized the map, but hurts the new players. What else? I remember the very first time the Cybern destroyer walked on land. That was a good day. And that was a Chris idea. So we did our PC Gamer first look, and we never told them the name of what we were calling the spider bot internally. That was its name, which not very imaginative, but it got the point across. And I guess someone at PC Gamer just put a placeholder name in, which was Monkey Lord, and then they forgot to replace it, and it shipped. So we saw that and we were like, oh, I guess we changed the name. And so yeah, PC Gamer named that unit.
Yeah.
Original Aeon colors were we took those original screenshots, and you can probably find them online still somewhere, but the original screenshots I was taking had UEF is red, I think Cybern's green, and Aeon is yellow.
Oh, that is so wrong. You can't
before
do that.
We picked our 3 colors, and from then on, in every screenshot, we used those colors.
There's always a conversation that happens about the Titan, the T3 UEF. It has a missile that shoots out of its back in the videos, but in the game it doesn't have it.
I don't remember that one. My guess is they were having trouble with it not just shooting itself in the head, would be my guess. Coordinated attack, there's one. On demos, coordinated attack looked good and worked every time, but for the demo, it was actually just me timing the attacks to arrive at the same time, and we just had the UI flash up. I don't know if coordinated attack ever worked, to be honest.
I don't know if it works either.
It was a really good idea that no one ever used, so I don't think it ever got any love. Like if you grab a whole group of units and you say attack, the faster units will go slower, so they all arrive at the same time, right? Like that's normal. That's the way the game works.
Yeah.
And the idea was you could also grab another group and send them to the same spot. And if this full group was all, say, fighters, and this group was all tanks, the fighters would actually fly slower, even though they're not grouped together. And they would arrive at the same time, and there would be an actual countdown timer, say coordinated attack, and it would say exactly when everybody was going to arrive.
Yeah.
But then we realized that no one used it, and really all that mattered was that the one group you sent all moved at the same speed, and that's all that anyone cared about. So I believe that's what got fixed, and everything else got ignored.
I'm curious how you know that no one uses it. Do you get some sort of analytics out of the game?
Well, again, once release, it was done, so we only ever had us, and no one internally used it because it just wasn't that useful for us. I'm sure there's going to be people here who hear this and say like, oh, you should have spent time on it. And but yeah, no, just no one internally ever used it, so it never got fixed.
All right, well, let's ask everybody. If anyone is listening, answers below. Do you use coordinated attack? And
does it work?
Yeah.
Because the E3 demo, we had it did not. It was very much like, if you watch the old videos of the announcement of the original Supcom, we show the coordinated attack, and then I zoom out and zoom into something else.
Yeah.
And we never actually showed them getting there. Yeah. Same with like Seaton. I think Seaton's Clutch was the map we used, was never meant to be a real map either, but it got so much attention art-wise because of the demos that we were like, well, why wouldn't we ship it? And so we put it in the game. It wasn't deemed to be very well balanced. So it got a little bit of love to it to help it out, but it ended up being a lot of people's favorite map, which is funny. My favorite was Open Palms, was the one we played the most internally because you could get a game in quickly. It didn't drag out too long because we never had hours to play. It was always trying to get.
Would you play like lots of team games, or would you play 1v1 games?
For mostly we would play. So if it was lunchtime, we would play team games. If it was just a quick run through things, it'd be 1v1, and those we would play usually something like Open Palms. I tried really hard to make a good version of Coast to Coast from Total Annihilation, which was my favorite map. I don't know if you ever play it. It's basically strips of land on either side and just water kind of being like throw things at each other, and it was fun. And it gave me enough time to do can drops, which was my favorite move in Total Annihilation. But I never could get a good version of it working in Supcom, so I don't know if anyone ever made that.
Do you have any questions for us? Is there anything else like that? You're wondering how things ended up?
So I've been looking at it again. I have chat opened in the background right now. It's like, looking at people here, Viking and Jagged Appliance. That's a good name. The things that are funny on it is I still see a couple of icons. The Son of Shagrath icon still around. I saw that a while back ago. That was our at the time our CEO's. He made that one for himself.
You're talking about the avatars?
Yeah, the avatars in that was GPGNet now
right.
FAF. It's funny to see them all in place. It's really cool. So yeah, there's the old Terran one, or the old UEF one I can see there.
Yeah.
There was actually quite a few that probably never made it over that were like just, they were internal only. Like I had one that was a bear face that was like a badly drawn, literally MS Paint bear face that I used. And a few others that devs had that I don't know if they ever made it across to y'all side. The avatars were a big deal in the day because it was the only way we could show that someone did something.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have a really good like trophy system or anything like that. So if you won a tournament or if you were first place on the leaderboard, you got something that you could then brag about by just literally talking to people.
And 9 years later, it's still exactly the same.
Pretty cool.
There we go.
That's props to Chris for deciding this was an important thing because it was a lot of work. Almost didn't never happen.
Yeah, well, that was almost the undoing of Forged Alliance was when GPGNet got shut off because the game was still there, but the servers weren't. So.
And then the forums got shut down as well.
That's right. And then Supilot just decided to build his own client for the game, which is pretty amazing. To just come and reproduce what would have been a team of developers over there. And I don't think he was even really a programmer. So I don't really know how he did it. He did an amazing job. And then it just changed hands. And 9 years later, here we are. We've got about 23,000 people play a month.
Wow.
We've had 8 million games played. I added it up the other day. Yep. If you take the duration of all those games and add it together, it's 460 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We love our Supcom over there.
I do not have the time nor patience to get good enough at games to be able to play multiplayer in any real fashion anymore. But I am interested in the new campaign, so I'm going to take a look at that.
There's
see what the new faction's all about.
Campaign because I think in Forged Alliance it shipped with I don't think there was a campaign where you could play as Seraphim.
Yeah, no, the whole point was that they were a new multiplayer faction, but it was everyone against them was the idea.
Yeah, well, one of our community members has decided to make his own campaign.
That's awesome.
She's launched recently. And you can play that as Seraphim, but he also made the counter campaign to it, or he's like, that's what he's working on at the moment. So you can play as UEF against that whole storyline. So he's going to town on that. Yeah. So, he's keeping himself busy. But yeah, the other interesting thing that I found lately is players who are less competitive can join like just a sort of casual clan, that type of thing, and just hang out with some people who want to just enjoy the game and without taking it too seriously. And I'm a member of like this Australian community that's pretty good. I don't know how many there are of us. There's probably like 300 or something like that. But we're playing with the same people every night, and everyone's like totally chill, and it's really cool because it makes the game just like fun to play, and you don't have to like actually be an expert at it or feel in any way like you need to be really good. So that's something I'm looking into at the moment, is how to like create more of these like little sub communities and push them out to get people to join, because I really think it makes kind of like the community a better place to just.
It makes it much more open and accessible for folks as well.
Yeah.
Like, I remember we launched and like I literally quit playing multiplayer within a week because I was like, well, there's no chance I'm not going to win, and I'm not even going to have fun more than likely. And ended up just playing with friends, which is kind of what you're saying, which is, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, I have a friend, you know how like some people rage quit? My friend rage uninstalls the game.
Oh my God.
And he's done it so many times. He just...
I remember like, that actually reminds me that there was one where they actually, when we released the original game, they sent us over copies, but it wasn't like boxed copies. We just got a spindle of like, back in the day, you get those stacks of CDs, like 100 CDs.
Yeah.
We just got a spindle of Supcom discs, and we gave them out to everyone on the team. But like, just literally, like, there was a spindle of like 40 in a drawer and next to my desk for like the next 6 years. I don't know what happened to those. It's like those and the little weird dongles we had to use for development to lock the game down. There's another one that's good for THQ. They decided to remove copy protection immediately on release. So that was a like week 1 patch for the original Supreme Commander because it shipped with some kind of copy protection that none of us wanted. And they did actually remove that.
Why did they do that?
A couple of reasons. One, there was a big thing with everyone hating on, which helped us get the point across, everyone hating on copy protection at the time, and the fact that no one, like, it got, cracked almost immediately. But it was just the dev team side. We all wanted nothing, no copy protection. And they agreed. I don't know why they agreed, but yay. And it made it much better because, the original game, they were very hardcore on trying to be everything locked down. And I think there may have been a backlash on Company Heroes or something. Who knows? I can't remember. But something ended up helping us get our point across.
Oh.
Yeah. And then Forged Alliance, they never bothered with it, which is great.
You're right. Yeah. Well, that's a win. All right. Well, look, thank you heaps for joining us. It's been really great for us to hear from some of the original team members who are actually there in the trenches. So it's been really good to hear your stories. If I'll ask people to leave questions in the comments if they want to find out anything. I'm sure they'll have some good questions, and maybe if we get enough of them, we can have another chat one time.
Sounds good. Yeah. And yeah, awesome. Like, what y'all are doing is awesome. The fact that this is still alive and still being played is just really, really cool. And I pop in every couple of years to take a look at it. And I think the last time I was in was literally like 3 years ago. So I've got my account and pop in and say hi, and everybody's like,
who are you?
Who the hell are you? Yeah. I'm like, well, I actually worked on it. No,
they're like, who the hell are you? This is my game. Get out.
And it is. It's the cool part. Is it literally is y'all's game at this point. Like, it is bigger and better than we ever thought to make it. So it's just awesome. Like, I'm excited that y'all are doing what y'all are doing, and hope y'all keep it up because just keep making it better. All
right, cool. All right, Jeremy, thank you very much for your time. Absolutely. To everybody that's listening, if you have a question for Jeremy, pop it in the comments below. And that's it.
All right. Thanks, Mike.